And in that moment, you can see how things change for Daniel. He suddenly goes quiet. His posture changes from his confident hands to now shoulders slightly hunched and his movements slower, more guarded. As he's guided into the back of the patrol car, he doesn't resist. He just sits there in silence, because deep down, he may already know. After decades of running around, investigators had finally found their suspect. But how did he even end up here? Because the secret he's been carrying since a New Year's Eve 35 years ago is about to catch up to him.
And now, let's rewind. 35 years. Back to a New Year's Eve celebration. Back to a night that began with music, crowded bars, and people counting down to a brand new year. Back to a young mother who believed her life was finally moving in the right direction. The cigarette hit the pavement without a second thought. A small piece of trash tossed from a truck window on an ordinary afternoon in Pensacola, Florida. To most people, it meant nothing. But hidden nearby, investigators watched closely. For months, they had followed the man behind the wheel. They had studied his movements, reviewed decades-old files, and reconstructed a crime that had happened before some of the detectives on the case were even born. Now, everything depended on a single piece of discarded evidence. If they were right, the DNA on that cigarette would finally identify the man who had escaped justice for 35 years. The man had no idea. No idea that detectives were waiting. No idea that science had finally caught up with him. And no idea that before the day was over, he would be sitting in an interrogation room being confronted with the murder of a young mother whose family had spent decades waiting for answers. Her name was Tonya McKinley. And this is how a New Year's Eve celebration turned into one of Pensacola's longest-running cold cases. Before we continue, viewer discretion is advised. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, we uncover real investigations, forgotten victims, and the cases that refuse to stay buried. Now let's go back to New Year's Eve, 1984. Long before she became a cold case file, Tonya Etheridge McKinley was a daughter, a friend, and a mother. Friends described her as energetic and outgoing. She was the kind of person who could strike up a conversation with anyone, the center of attention without even trying, the person who brought life into a room. If there was laughter nearby, chances were Tonya was responsible for it. But beneath her outgoing personality was someone carrying responsibilities far bigger than most people her age. She was raising an 18-month-old son, and by the end of 1984, she was trying to rebuild her life. Tonya had recently left an abusive relationship. According to those closest to her, she was determined to move forward. She wanted stability. She wanted a better future. Most importantly, she wanted to create a safe life for her child. For the first time in a long time, things seemed to be improving. A new year was approaching, and with it came hope. No one around her could have imagined that she was only hours away from becoming the victim of a crime that would remain unsolved for more than 3 decades. December 31st, 1984. Pensacola was alive with celebration. Bars were crowded. Music filled the air. People gathered with friends and family to welcome the start of a new year. Tonya joined the festivities like thousands of others across the city. Witnesses later reported seeing her at establishments near the University Mall area. She appeared relaxed, happy, social. Nothing about the evening suggested anything unusual. Nothing suggested danger. Investigators would later spend years trying to reconstruct her final movements. Who she spoke with, who she left with, where she went, and what happened during the final hours of her life. But the deeper they looked, the more frustrating the timeline became. Some people remembered seeing her. Others remembered conversations. But nobody could account for every minute. Somewhere during those missing hours, Tonya encountered the person responsible for her death. At the time, she likely had no reason to suspect anything. No reason to believe the night would end differently than countless others before it. But before sunrise, everything would change. The first day of 1985 began with a routine drive. A mother and daughter were transporting their sick dog to a veterinary appointment. As they traveled through Escambia County, something caught their attention. At first, it appeared to be debris, maybe discarded clothing, maybe an animal. But as they got closer, they realized it was neither. It was a person. Authorities were contacted immediately. Within a short time, investigators arrived at the scene. The victim was identified as 23-year-old Tonya McKinley. Detectives immediately noticed details that raised serious questions. Her shoes were missing. Her clothing was dirty. A blue towel was found nearby. Personal belongings remained at the scene. And perhaps most importantly, investigators began to suspect that the location where Tonya was found was not where the crime had originally occurred. Evidence suggested her body had been moved. Whoever was responsible appeared to have transported her there. It was a troubling discovery. Not only had a young woman lost her life, but detectives were now dealing with someone who had taken deliberate steps to distance the crime from its original location. That meant critical evidence could be miles away, and every passing hour reduced the chances of finding it. Investigators immediately launched a large-scale effort to determine what had happened. Friends were interviewed. Witnesses were tracked down. Bars and businesses were visited. Detectives attempted to retrace every step Tonya had taken during the final hours of her life. At the same time, forensic evidence was collected. Biological samples, fibers, physical evidence recovered from the scene. Everything that might identify a suspect. But there was a major problem. The year was 1985. Modern DNA profiling did not yet exist. Investigators possessed evidence that could potentially identify the killer. They simply lacked the technology needed to use it. It was like having the answer locked inside a safe with no key. The evidence remained. The science did not. As weeks became months, investigators followed every lead available. Potential suspects were examined. Tips were investigated. Witnesses were re-interviewed. Yet every path seemed to end the same way, with more questions and fewer answers. Eventually, the case began to cool. The evidence remained locked away, waiting for a future generation of investigators. Waiting for technology that had not yet been invented. Waiting for someone who refused to let the case die. And while the investigation stalled, the person responsible continued living freely, building a life, working jobs, meeting people, blending into society. All while Tonya's family continued waiting for answers. Answers that wouldn't come for another 35 years. For Tonya's family, the years that followed were filled with uncertainty. Birthdays came and went. Holidays passed. Life moved forward, but the questions never disappeared. Who did this? Why? And would they ever be found? As the decades passed, detectives changed. Investigators retired. Evidence was transferred between departments. Case files collected dust. To many people, it seemed unlikely the crime would ever be solved. Yet one thing never changed. The evidence. Hidden within that evidence was the identity of the killer. The problem was that nobody yet knew how to unlock it. For years, the answer sat silently inside police storage, waiting, and eventually, science caught up. The breakthrough that investigators had hoped for since 1985 was finally about to arrive. And when it did, it would change everything.